High above the clouds at 30,000 feet, a loud executive slammed his hand on the armrest and shouted right at me, "Look at your cheap clothes! You don't belong in first class. Give up your seat for my colleague. I'm a VIP and I practically own this airline." He had no idea. The quiet woman in the simple sweater reading a book right beside us was the actual chairwoman of the entire airline. And she was about to show him what real power sounds like when it stays completely silent. The cabin lights were dimmed low on the overnight flight from New York to London. It was supposed to be a 6-hour journey, but because the economy section was overbooked, the ground staff had quietly upgraded me and my 6-year-old daughter Millie to first class. I never asked for it. I just accepted it with a grateful nod and carried our small bags down the aisle. I knew we looked completely out of place the moment we stepped in. My old canvas jacket was frayed at the shoulders, and the dark circles under my eyes showed I had spent the previous night awake caring for Millie when she was sick. She clutched her white rabbit backpack tightly against her chest, her little face still pale from the long wait at the airport. Around us were thick velvet seats, crystal champagne glasses, and passengers in expensive suits who barely looked up from their laptops. I felt every pair of eyes on us as we made our way to our assigned seats. I kept my head down, moving as quietly as I could so we wouldn't disturb anyone. Then I heard the voice. A man sitting 2 rows ahead, Sterling, a sharply dressed investment executive with a heavy Rolex on his wrist, turned and stared at us with open disgust. He leaned toward the colleague beside him and spoke loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "The airline is really going downhill. I thought this was first class, not a city bus stop." I heard every word. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. I simply lifted our small bag into the overhead bin, then knelt down to buckle Millie's seatbelt with slow, careful hands. I positioned my body so my broad shoulders blocked most of the curious stares from reaching her. She didn't need to feel the weight of their judgment. Millie looked up at me with those trusting eyes and whispered, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" I smiled gently and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. Just close your eyes and rest. Daddy's right here." I sat down beside her, folded my hands in my lap, and stared straight ahead at the dark window. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but inside me everything was quiet. I had learned long ago that losing my temper never protected my daughter. Staying calm and steady was the only armor I had. I had no idea that the woman sitting silently in the aisle seat right next to us, the one in the plain sweater quietly reading a thick book, was watching everything. And I certainly had no idea she was the person who truly ran this airline. All I knew in that moment was that I would do whatever it took to keep my little girl feeling safe, even 30,000 feet above the ground. The plane had been in the air for almost 2 hours when I finally noticed her properly. She was sitting in the aisle seat right next to me, wearing a simple gray sweater and a soft scarf wrapped around her neck. A thick book rested in her lap, and she turned the pages slowly, as if the rest of the cabin did not exist. She looked like any tired traveler on a long overnight flight, quiet, unassuming, and lost in her own world. I did not know her name. I did not know anything about her, but I could feel her eyes on us from time to time. She watched as I asked the flight attendant for a glass of plain water instead of the champagne they offered. She saw me carefully tear the bread roll into small pieces so Millie could eat without making a mess. And when Millie's ears started to hurt from the pressure, she observed me guiding my daughter through the breathing exercise I had taught her. Slow breaths in, slow breaths out, my voice low and patient. I kept everything gentle. I did not want Millie to feel the tension in the cabin. I did not want her to notice the way Sterling kept glancing at us with that cold stare. Then it happened. Millie's crayon slipped from her small hand and rolled across the carpet straight toward the woman's feet. Before I could reach down, the woman leaned forward and picked it up with calm fingers. She held the crayon out to Millie with a soft smile. Millie looked up at her without any fear. She took the crayon and whispered, "Thank you." Daddy says people who like reading books on airplanes usually have very beautiful worlds hidden inside them. The woman's eyes softened. For the first time, she closed her book and turned slightly toward us. "That is a lovely thing to say," she replied gently. "What is your name, little one?" "Millie," my daughter answered proudly. "And this is my daddy." I gave the woman a small, respectful nod. "Holden, nice to meet you. Sorry if we're disturbing your reading." "You are not disturbing me at all," she said. Her voice was warm and surprisingly kind. It is rare to see someone so patient on a long flight. We spoke quietly for a few minutes. I told her Millie had been sick the night before, and that was why we looked so tired. She listened carefully, asking gentle questions about Millie's favorite drawings and what she wanted to be when she grew up. There was no judgment in her eyes, no sign that she thought we did not belong here. I treated her the same way I would treat any other passenger, with simple respect and gratitude. I had no idea who she really was. I had no idea that the quiet woman in the plain sweater reading beside me was Ilara Sterling, the actual chairwoman of the entire airline. All I knew was that for the first time since we stepped into first class, someone was looking at us not as intruders, but as people. And that small kindness felt like a deep breath of fresh air at 30,000 feet. About 2 hours into the flight, the tension I had been trying to ignore finally broke. Sterling's phone buzzed. He answered it quickly, then turned to the flight attendant with a sharp voice. His colleague from business class wanted to join him in first class. Sterling did not ask. He demanded. He pressed the call button again and again until the chief flight attendant hurried over. In a loud, impatient tone, he ordered her to move me and Millie back to the economy section so his colleague could take our seats. The attendant looked uncomfortable. She explained the upgrade was official and could not be reversed mid-flight. Sterling's face darkened. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, marching straight toward our row. He stopped right in front of me and dropped a thick stack of $100 bills onto my tray table. The money landed with a heavy slap. "Take this and carry your kid back to where you both belong," he said coldly. "The sound of her breathing is distracting me from my work. People like you do not belong up here." The entire cabin went dead silent. I could feel every passenger pretending not to watch. Millie pressed herself tightly against my side, her small body trembling. She hid her face in my chest, trying to disappear. I looked down at the money, then back at Sterling. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice low and completely steady. "Your money cannot buy respect," I said quietly. "We have valid tickets for these seats, and my daughter is not disturbing anyone. Please return to your own seat." Sterling let out a short, bitter laugh. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black card with gold lettering. "You think you can lecture me?" he sneered. "I fly 100,000 miles every year. I know the entire board of directors. I practically own this airline, and I can make sure you are placed on the permanent no-fly list before we even land." The words hung heavy in the pressurized air. Millie's grip on my shirt tightened. I felt her little heart beating fast against me. I placed one hand gently on her back, shielding her as much as I could with my body. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I simply looked him in the eyes and repeated the same calm sentence. "We are not moving. Please sit down." The silence in the cabin grew even thicker. No one spoke. No one moved. The low hum of the engines was the only sound left. I had no idea that the quiet woman sitting right beside me had closed her book the moment Sterling started shouting. I had no idea her eyes were now fixed on him with a completely different kind of focus. All I knew was that I would stay calm for Millie, no matter what happened next. Even at 30,000 feet with nowhere to run, I would not let this man make my daughter feel small. The moment Sterling reached out to grab my sleeve, everything changed. The woman beside me closed her book. The soft sound of the pages snapping shut cut through the heavy silence like a blade. She placed the book on her lap, unwrapped the scarf from her neck, and stood up slowly. In that single movement, the quiet passenger I had been speaking with disappeared. The woman who rose now carried an unmistakable presence that filled the entire cabin. Every head turned. Even the flight attendants froze. Sterling paused, his hand still hanging in the air. He looked at her with irritation, ready to snap at another stranger. She spoke first. Her voice was calm, measured, and completely without anger. "You do not own this airline." Sterling blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" She did not raise her voice. She turned slightly toward the chief flight attendant who was standing nearby, pale and nervous. "Martha," she said gently, "please bring me the internal tablet." The attendant's hands trembled as she hurried to retrieve it. When she returned and handed the tablet over, her face went completely white. She had just recognized the woman beside me. The woman took the tablet, tapped the screen once, and looked back at Sterling with steady eyes. "My name is Ilara Sterling," she said. "I am the chairwoman of the board of this airline. And you were correct about one thing. We do have the authority to place anyone on the permanent no-fly list." The cabin went deathly still. Only the low hum of the engines remained. Sterling's face drained of all color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The heavy Rolex on his wrist suddenly looked ridiculous. The stack of $100 bills he had thrown at me now lay forgotten on the tray table like a bad joke. Ilara continued in the same quiet tone. "Martha, please cancel this passenger's Black Diamond membership immediately. When we land, have airport security waiting at the gate to escort him off the aircraft. From this moment forward, he is banned from every flight operated by this airline." Sterling stumbled backward and sank into his seat. His legs looked like they could no longer hold him. The man who had been shouting only minutes earlier now sat in complete silence, humiliated in front of the entire first-class cabin. Ilara turned away from him, as if he no longer existed. She looked at me and Millie. The cold authority in her eyes melted into something warm and gentle. "I am truly sorry for what you and your daughter have endured," she said softly. "You handled this with more dignity and patience than most people ever show. You are a remarkable father, Holden." Millie peeked out from my chest, still clutching my shirt. Ilara smiled at her, a real, kind smile, and reached out to gently adjust the blanket around my daughter's shoulders. In that moment, 30,000 feet above the earth, everything I thought I knew about power, about who belonged and who did not, had been turned upside down in the most silent way possible. The woman I had treated with simple respect, the woman who had listened to Millie's innocent words about beautiful hidden worlds, was the person who actually owned this airline, and she had just chosen to protect us without ever raising her voice. The wheels touched the runway in London with a soft thud, and the long flight was finally over. Sterling was escorted off the plane in complete silence by airport security. No shouting, no dramatic scene, just quiet footsteps and the click of handcuffs as they led him away. I held Millie's hand tightly as we walked through the nearly empty terminal. The bright lights felt strangely peaceful after the tension in the sky. I expected Alara to disappear into a private VIP lounge or be whisked away by a team of assistants and black cars. Instead, she did something I will never forget. She refused the waiting VIP escort. She simply picked up her small carry-on bag, smiled at the ground staff, and walked beside us through the terminal like any other passenger. Millie, still a little sleepy, reached out and slipped her tiny hand into Alara's fingers without hesitation. Alara looked surprised for a moment. Then her face softened into the warmest smile I had ever seen. She gently held my daughter's hand as we walked together under the high glass ceiling of the airport. There were no cameras, no photographers, no announcements. Just 3 people walking side by side. A single father in an old canvas jacket, a 6-year-old girl with her rabbit backpack, and the woman who owned the airline we had just flown on. We stopped at a quiet coffee stand. Millie leaned against my leg and looked up at Alara with bright eyes. "Thank you for being nice to us," she said softly. Alara knelt down so she was at Millie's level. "Thank you for reminding me what really matters," she replied. "Your father is a very good man, Millie. Never forget that." I stood there, watching them, my heart full in a way I cannot describe. The woman who had the power to destroy a man's entire world with a few quiet words had chosen instead to walk with us and hold my daughter's hand. In that ordinary moment in a quiet airport terminal, all the walls that separate people, money, status, first class, and economy, simply disappeared.
You know, my friend, this story is an original piece of fiction crafted from the heart. Though the characters are imagined, the feelings are very real. The pain of being looked down upon, the exhaustion of a single father trying to protect his child, and the quiet power of true kindness. This tale carries one simple truth. Never judge a person by the clothes they wear or the seat they sit in. Real power is never loud. It does not need to shout or humiliate. It lives in the steady calm of a father who refuses to break in front of his daughter. It lives in the choice of someone at the very top who decides to stand up for those the world calls small. A VIP card cannot buy character. A fancy title cannot buy dignity. What truly defines us is how we treat people who can give us nothing in return. Thank you for flying through this story with me today. If it touched your heart, please let me know in the comments. I will keep bringing you these healing stories every week, because here we believe that quiet kindness will always win in the end.